So we'll introduce our esteemed guest, Jimmy.
That's okay, Jimmy. I can introduce myself.
Okay. Anyway, we're going to start out with a talk for a 3 to 5 minutes limit, 5 minutes total limit. And after that, we'll take questions from the audience, and Karen will call on you, I guess, for your question, and then we'll have 2 minutes to answer those questions. You can direct those questions to either one of us, but then the other person can also answer the question, and then they can also ask for another response if the person says something they really strongly want to comment on for about another 30 seconds. So those are basically the rules, and we're ready to start.
So when I put this up, you have 30 seconds.
Oh, okay.
And when this, I'm setting it at 5 minutes. When the 5 minutes or less time in the future, what do you want to do? Respond, answers to questions after the initial comments? Okay.
Who do we decide starting?
Well, John.
Okay.
Well, let him introduce himself. That's not part of the 5 minutes.
Yeah, let him introduce himself.
I'll introduce myself, Jimmy. I guess we don't have the amplification here. And I forgot to take an antihistamine this morning, so we'll see what happens. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm John Haberman. I lived with my family in Omaha, Nebraska until we moved to the farm in southeast Nebraska when I was about 10 years old. I graduated from high school with a class size of 13. Who else do you know with a class size of 13? I earned a bachelor's in chemistry at the University of Nebraska and a PhD from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I was a research chemist with Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati for 11 or 12 years, and then worked for Texaco for almost 20 years until I retired in 1999. My wife of 50 years and I have 2 wonderful daughters, and we spend our summers back at the family farm in Nebraska. We are active members in the Unitarian Fellowship of Houston. Now, I have to admit, I'm really kind of nervous about this. I have not been in a debate since high school. And I'm not an activist. But I have given a lot of papers in front of scientific groups, and I'm telling you, they seem to all deteriorate into debate. So I suppose it would be just normal.
John, shall I start the timer? Are you ready to begin your presentation?
You should have already started it.
Well, we agreed his
That was just the introduction. Yeah, start it now is fine.
Okay, I'll start it now.
I enjoy owning guns and shooting, but I'd rather shoot than have to defend them, but we got to defend them. I want to make the case for the private ownership of guns and limited laws. And my best source I've found is a version that I edited of an article by Randall Hoven called Murder by Numbers, published in the American Thinker, December 27th of 2012. The whole issue of, according to him, now a lot of what I'm saying is a direct quote from what he wrote. The whole issue of gun control is a distraction, he wrote. The homicide rate is one of the few things that are on a good trend. Why are we even discussing something that is historically low and declining instead of our unsustainable debt, which is historically high and climbing? The murder rate in 2011 was lower than it was 100 years ago in 1911, and the trend is downward. At 4.7 homicides, this is total homicides from all sources, per 100,000. And it was the lowest since 1961. It was slightly lower in the years of 1955 to 1959, which ran about 4.5 to 4.6. Now, if you look at the curve, you get an unusual shaped curve. It's kind of M-shaped. In the early 1900s, it's low. Then in the 1920s and 30s, it goes up. And then in the 1950s, it goes down, goes back up in 1980 to hit a peak, and now it's way down. The murder rate has been cut by more than half since 1980, from about 10.7 per 100,000 to 4.7 per 100,000. During this time, The prison population quadrupled, executions quadrupled, and concealed carry permits quadrupled. All people have also theorized that the Roe v. Wade, which was passed in the late 70s, may have contributed to the declining rate of homicides. Out of the 206 countries in the UN, the U.S. is right in the middle, number 103, with the rate of 4.7 per 100,000. Now, there are a lot of other countries that you might think would score fairly low, but Brazil has 21, Greenland 19.2, Costa Rica 10, Lithuania 6.6, and the Ukraine 5.2. The thing that I'm most interested in is this next statement. In 2011, 52% of the murders were by blacks, when the race of the murderer was known. Now, for a lot of these, the race is not known. Now, the blacks are only 13.6% of the population. This leaves the murder rate for non-blacks at about 2.6 per 100,000. And this is a quote from another report. Quote, take out the black underclass from the statistics, and even American murder rates fall to European levels. The murder rates of the various U.S. states vary over a wide range. We hear composite murder rates for the whole U.S. In the 2010 to 2011, these are almost all 2011, Idaho was 2.3, Oregon 2.1, Maine 2.0, Utah 1.9, Iowa 1.5, Minnesota 1.4, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Rhode Island had a three-way tie of 1.3, Hawaii 1.2, and New Hampshire 1.0. This is murder rate per 100,000 population. Adding guns to the discussion,
John, 30 seconds.
An analysis of 172 countries shows that every country, well, I'm going to skip this one, but the bottom line is statistics show that more guns means less murder. What about gun control? A 2000 to 2002 CDC task force studied the scientific evidence for the effectiveness of firearms laws in preventing violence, including violent crime, suicide, and unintentional injury. I got another 15
Did you want
seconds.
to continue, or, okay, that's 5 minutes for John. So it'll be Jimmy's turn now. You've got more time.
Your time is up for right now.
That was 5 minutes. Do you need more time?
Well, I got just a
Let him finish his
couple
sentence.
more
Finish it
points.
up, yeah, let's finish
It'll take another 15, 20 seconds.
it. Okay, sure.
Quote, the task force found, this is a CDC task force that took 3 years. The task force found insufficient evidence to determine the effectiveness of any of the firearms laws or combinations of laws reviewed on violent outcomes. Benjamin Franklin once observed, those who would give up liberty for security will neither obtain nor deserve either one.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Now we have Jimmy.
Good morning, everyone. Well, my background is I'm a native Houstonian also. I'm currently president of the West Houston Democratic Club where we're having this debate. But for 5 years, I was active with Texans for Gun Safety. We worked with David Smith and others to try to educate the public on the dangers of guns and what we can do to try to reduce the number of killings by guns in the U.S. The National Rifle Association always wants to make it look like it's us versus the criminals, but that's not really the case. Many of these shootings start out with people who've never had any type of criminal record, but they happen to have a gun with easy access in their homes. So they get mad at somebody, get depressed, get upset. Sometimes they kill their wife, sometimes they kill their children, sometimes they go out and have a mass killing at some school or some other location. And they've never had any criminal record at all in the past, but they get distressed, upset, and they have easy access to a gun in their homes. we have about 30,000 killings by guns every year in the U.S. Close to 20,000 of those are suicides. And these are people that have become distressed. Usually within the hour before that, then they go and commit suicide. A lot of times their family has no idea, why they did it, but they were upset or depressed and decided to do this. And if the gun had not been available, they would not probably have done it. There's another group called Mayors Against Illegal Guns. It's headed up by Mayor Bloomberg in New York. There's 800 mayors that are members of this organization. And then one of those is our own mayor, Anise Parker. And they say that 33 people are murdered every day with guns, and 46 are suicides by guns every day. They say guns in the home greatly increase the risk of youth suicides, and the American Academy of Pediatrics urges parents to remove guns from their homes. There's another group called Women Against Gun Violence, headed up by Laurie Saffin. They're also trying to educate people about the dangers of guns. Regarding suicides, the top 3 states for gun ownership are Wyoming, Montana, and Alaska. They have a higher percentage of gun ownership than any other states. And incidentally, they are also the 3 highest states for suicides. Wyoming's number 1 for suicides, number 1 for gun ownership. And so that shows you a really big tie between access to guns in your home and owning guns. Now, some of the ways to control what's going on and to try to stop some of the mass killings like we had in Connecticut last month, where about 25 people were killed. Of course, 30 people are killed in the U.S. every day, at least beside what went on up there. We'd like to see 100% background checks. I think it makes sense to have all gun sales have a background check. Currently, about 47% are not having background checks. And the polls show that 86 to 89% of the people support background checks for all gun sales. We also would like to have no military-style assault weapons. We'd like to limit the size of clips to 10 rounds. There's no reason to have these rounds that hold 30 bullets. So they can go and just kill a whole bunch of school kids. We like to reduce those high-capacity magazines down to 10 rounds. We like to have gun safety courses. When you own a gun, you should probably have to take a safety course. You should be required to have a trigger lock in the home on your gun so that a child cannot pick up the gun and accidentally shoot himself or somebody else. We should have a waiting period so that people cannot go in and buy a gun when they're angry and then go shoot somebody with it the same day. And gun buybacks are another thing that could be used and are being used in various cities. They buy guns back from gun owners, offering, sometimes they give them debit cards for Target or Walmart or Kroger, and they're usually for about like $100, but I think that myself that people would be glad to have $50 to get rid of a gun out of their house. Some of the other interesting facts about...
Jimmy? 30
Okay.
seconds.
Each time a gun is used in the home for self-defense, it is used 7 times in a domestic assault or murder, 4 times in an accidental shooting, and 11 times in suicides. In other words, you're 22 times more likely to kill a family member or shoot a family member or a friend than an intruder. And most people have guns in their homes to stop intruders. 82% of the children who commit suicide do it with their parents' gun.
Jimmy, you need about a minute or two?
So my main point here is that you're much safer in homes without guns than you are in homes with guns.
Now, you want to continue with another 5 minutes each?
No, we'll take questions now.
All right.
Sid.
Jimmy, you just call on because
Okay.
it's hard for me to stand
Okay,
up.
Sid George, yeah.
Okay, let's see. How
2 minutes.
long will it take you to?
2 minutes.
Okay.
Once we start answering. Not yet.
Time the questioner to.
Yeah.
Okay, Sid.
Jimmy, I'm going to make a statement, then I'm going to ask for you to respond to the statement.
Okay.
Now, for the last 50 years, the murder rate in the United States has exceeded the death rate in combat every year for the last 50 years, with the exception of 1968. Okay? I'd like to point out, someone committing suicide that's not murder. Okay? And me personally, I'm considered concerned more about murder. Most of the murders, as John said, are committed by the majority of blacks. And against blacks too, by the way. They're for robbery, stealing money someplace, all drug related, breaking into homes to steal money for drugs, etc. And they're committed primarily with handguns. These AK-47s and AR-15 machine guns, while they get all the press, they commit a tiny fraction of the murders. Most of the murders are committed with pistols. Okay? And the gun control, the few governors, like in New York and stuff, that have instituted gun control, they've dramatically reduced the murder rate in their states. Now, I think that's where the progress is going to be found, is in the states, not in the federal government. It's too deadlocked. But based on these comments, since the murders are primarily committed with pistols, not with machine guns, and they're robbery related, individual one-on-one robbery type things, going in the store for robbery, and just happens to kill the guy. That's where the crime is, and it's with pistols, not with machine guns. So, outlawing machine guns isn't going to reduce it.
Okay. All right, thank you, Sid.
Should we have a 2-minute response from you and John?
Yeah, two each, 2 minutes each.
Okay.
Yeah, I know there is a lot of that type of crime, and it's all over the country, and there's a lot of it going on right now in Chicago, where they have a higher murder rate, and a lot of people are being killed up there, primarily in the black communities. But the mayor up there, he's trying to just work on that and try to bring it down. I think probably the best way to bring it down in a situation like that is to send more police into those areas where you have trouble. That's how they reduced crime in New York City. They got their maps out and looked to see where all the criminal incidents were, and including tagging, painting the buildings and all that where the neighborhood looks bad. And they focused more law enforcement there, and they brought their crime rate down. And I think Sid would like to have pistols banned rather than other guns, and that may be a good idea. I doubt that we'll ever be able to do that, but because people who want to carry concealed guns and so forth legally, that's the type of gun they would be carrying, would be a pistol. So that's what they're going to say they need to do to protect themselves. But I agree with Sid that pistols are what are used primarily in these. You see these stores that are being robbed. They go in there and try to rob somebody. Sometimes they end up shooting somebody. So it would be really good to reduce the number of pistols and maybe have more of these gun buybacks. Okay, John, you can respond to that also.
Yeah, I have a curiosity, which I'd like to
You want to stand up here?
address right now. That is, I'm kind of curious about where you people are. So what I'd like to do is conduct a short poll here, ask a few questions, and ask you to raise your hands in response to them. First question is, raise your hand if you have ever fired a gun of any kind at any time. Okay. Second question is, how many people here own any guns? Third question, how many have concealed carry permits? Got a couple. Okay, the next question has to do with pro-guns versus anti-guns. And then I'm going to have not interested in the debate too. Let's have everybody who is pro-gun, thinks guns are a good idea, raise your hand. Okay, everybody who is anti-guns, think, man, if you could get rid of them, you'd do it in a heartbeat. Okay.
No, there's a third, there's definitely a third.
Okay, what about people who think that the whole issue right now is a huge distraction, and we got so many more important things we ought to be working on, though we should not be sitting around talking about this.
That's Weasley.
Okay. Okay, that's something I wanted to do. Thanks a lot. And then I think you should go ahead and continue with people from the audience asking us questions.
Okay, Mr. Farb, would you like to, you can address your question to one or the other and,
Well, I'm going to make a statement.
okay, you're welcome.
Why don't you go ahead and turn around and face the
Turn around
camera?
and face the camera
There you
over
go.
here.
Go to the
Go ahead and get to the
Come over here,
microphone.
Aubrey, right? Stand up a little bit over here. Come back right here.
So the camera's in.
I'm concerned that probably most of us don't understand why the Second Amendment was passed. How many people feel that they understand?
Searched it, let her tell you.
What's that?
You probably got the same information about why it was put in the Constitution to begin with?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
For those who don't know or need to be refreshed, the United States was basically a rural population. And one of the biggest problems was Indian raids. And if you'll read the Second Amendment, it refers to the need to maintain a well-regulated militia. So that the purpose of the Second Amendment was to make sure that people could keep a rifle so that in the need to defend a community against attack, they could do it. Unfortunately, the Second Amendment's purpose has been greatly distorted. And it's been aggravated by one of the worst lobbies that we have in the United States, the NRA, which really does not represent gun owners, but represents gun manufacturers.
Amen.
Yes, correct.
If you listen to what they had, executive director of the NRA, Lafayette, whatever his name is, he keeps talking about taking away people's guns, the equivalent of taking away your liberty. Nobody is talking about taking away guns. We're not going to change the fact that people have guns, but we do need to protect ourselves, to prevent guns from being in the hands of the wrong people, and to prevent weapons in the hands of people that have no other purpose than mass killings.
Thank you, Aubrey.
So I would just like to ask the gentleman here, why are you talking about the numbers of murders and so forth? That is not the question that's going on in this country.
Tell me what it addressed to him.
You are trying to do what the gun lobby is doing, get us thinking and talking about the wrong things.
Okay, thank you, Aubrey.
let John answer.
That was
Well, I think
addressed to
that's
John.
John,
John, stand up there so
over
we
here.
can, thank you.
That's a
Aubrey.
valid question, and the reason I'm doing it is basically because that's what everybody else is doing. And I can find a good article on it. No, it doesn't. Let me read something. In the Federalist Paper 46, James Madison addressed the concern that a standing federal army might conduct a coup to take over the nation. He argued that this was implausible because, based on the country's population at that time, a federal standing army couldn't field more than 25 to 30,000 men. He then wrote, "To these would be opposed a militia amounting to near 500,000 of citizens with arms in their hands, officered by men chosen from among themselves, fighting for their common liberties, and united and conducted by governments possessing their affections and confidence."
You're making my point, sir.
Well, that's what I wanted to do. But I agree with you,
Let's let
you know.
him respond.
People tend to like number crunching, and I'm a scientist, so I crunch numbers like everybody else. But I agree with you. The basic reasons for having the Second Amendment and having guns is really has to do with the way that the Constitution was formulated and that the country is structured. Let's see, but it still has relevance. And there's another fact you don't hear much about, which refers to numbers. And that is in this area, people use guns for protection, for self-defense. A population of 4,977 households use guns for self-protection or self-defense 3.5% of the time per year. That's 1,029,615. That excludes police action. Another survey that was done in 1993, which is quite an early one, this was done by the CDC. And it said, came up with 498,000 times per year when people used guns to frighten away somebody who was trying to break into their home.
That's not what we're talking about. We're not
These
talking about
are-
taking away the people's guns.
These are still good numbers that everybody likes to duck and don't like to hear about.
Okay, John, that's very, thank you, John.
Okay, I'm going to respond to the same question. Wayne LaPierre has been the spokesman for the NRA for many years. He's always trying to scare people into thinking that somebody's going to break into their house or these criminals are going to come and get them. He talks recently about it takes a good guy to stop a bad guy. But he lies to the people. He talks about President Obama wanting to take away your guns. And that's the real thing behind this. And a lot of the NRA members really feel like that President Obama wants to take away their guns. Well, that's totally false.
How do you know?
Well, he's never said it, he's never implied it, and he's denied it. All of these laws are about future gun sales. They're not about coming around and picking up your guns. They're about having background checks to keep guns from going into the hands of people that are mentally ill or insane. Currently, about 47% of all gun sales are made without background checks. And they're even selling guns now on the internet without any type of check at all or registration. So the U.S., we have probably 300 million guns around in our country. But the homes with guns, those numbers are going down. There used to be about 50% of the homes had guns and down. Now they say it's down to closer to 30%. One of the problems is with our veterans. Veterans make up 7% of our population, but account for 20% of our suicides. In Israel, they were having this same problem with army guys committing suicide. So what they did, they would go home on the weekends with their family and then be on active duty during the week. But they said you can no longer take your guns home with you on the weekends. That's when these suicides were happening, when they were at home, they had stress, depression, they pull out a gun and kill themselves. Well, their suicide rate went down 40% by not allowing these soldiers to take guns home with them on the weekends. So that shows you that access to a gun when you're under stress causes suicides and murders.
Now, since this is a debate, do you
Can I
have
go
a
up on
response?
redirect?
You need 2 minutes, yes, you may, 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Yeah, I got a couple comments about the NRA. The NRA is for the Second Amendment what the American Civil Liberties Union and the Americans United for the Separation of Church and State is for the First Amendment. Tactics are similar, and although you will probably feel quite comfortable with ACLU and Americans United, a lot of people aren't. And they've been controversial, both in terms of their tactics and a lot of things that they've said.
Has nothing to do with guns.
But no, it's
Don't
not.
interrupt him, please.
But again, the situation is very similar, because what we're involved in now is incorporating the Second Amendment into the Constitution of the United States. Whenever situations like this come up, and you have ambiguities with regard to how something was meant when the Constitution was written, then you tend to have a group of lawsuits which are conducted, and they often go up to the Supreme Court, and the rulings of the Supreme Court then, and the total rulings of all this, it creates a body of law that involves incorporation. And the incorporation of the First Amendment has been pretty well taken care of, although lawsuits still occur, by these other organizations. Now, the incorporation of the Second Amendment has just basically started. And the NRA is the one who is, as an organization, is doing it. It's providing the funding for it.
Can we have a question answered here? My wife's arm is about to fall off.
Okay, well, Jimmy, you want to respond or you want to take the
Just, I'll
next
just
question?
make one statement real quick here. 74% of the NRA members support universal background checks, so the NRA is going against its own members by opposing universal background checks. Okay,
The whole
question.
reason for the NRA is for the manufacturers of the guns, of these weapons, to make profit. It has nothing to do with freedom. They have usurped the Second Amendment for their purposes. It's strictly for profit. Now, the ACLU, whether we agree or don't agree with everything that they take up, has nothing to do with corporate profits. I mean, it's a totally different thing. So I don't.
The background of the Second Amendment.
And my understanding of the background of the Second Amendment is that when the states were being formed into the United States of America, certain of the heavily slave-owning states wouldn't do it unless they had provisions for this gun amendment, because they had monthly posses that went around to all of the plantations and checked to make sure that the slaves were all in place. And if they weren't, then they went out and hunted them down. And they wanted to be able to continue this activity, and they were not going to join the Union unless this amendment was put in there that would give them the provision to go out armed.
That's interesting, thank you. That's good history there.
Is that a question directed to Jimmy or?
Well, yeah, I'll respond to that. I think the idea that the NRA, I feel like the NRA would disagree with your allegation that they are just strictly for gun sales and representing manufacturers. I don't think they would agree with that, but I know that is a lot of our perceptions, because they seem to oppose every restriction on any kind of gun sale. They want guns to be sold without any restriction at all. They seem to fight every law that comes up on that issue. So let's take another question.
How about Erica?
Erica.
Okay, I really do have a question, because we're talking about the ambiguity of things that may be in the Constitution, Bill of Rights, or what have you. Okay, what exactly do you believe is the meaning of a well-regulated militia? Which actually I heard way back in the 50s when I was helping my parents to get their citizenship. And that was very important to them, a well-regulated militia. And what happens to this well-regulated militia? Was Adam Lanza in a well-regulated, is Ted Nugent in a well-regulated militia? Okay, so let me, have we just decided to just chuck that whole thing and not bring it up? Because I never hear Wayne LaPierre say anything about a well-regulated militia. Neither do I hear Ted Cruz, while he's waiving the Constitution and talking about the Second Amendment, ever saying anything about what a well-regulated militia is and who comprises this. And we heard why it happened. This was news to me. This is great.
I have the Constitution right here, and it says
a well-regulated.
But not about the slavery.
Right. It doesn't say anything about that. But I understood it to mean, well, at that time, in working with my parents, I understood it to mean that because there was no standing army, that these individuals, who are now Americans, are going to be able to support and defend any kind of, thoughts by the British or anyone else to come back and recolonize. So anyway, this is my question. What does it mean?
Thank you, Erica. You mentioned Wayne LaPierre, and he is paid over $1 million a year by the NRA to be their spokesman. But to get to your question, I think you're right. We no longer need a regulated militia. There's no such thing now. We have an actual army, we have the National Guard, etc. But what we're up against here is the Supreme Court has ruled that people do have a right to own guns. So regardless of the militia business, they have a right to own guns. Now, they can be regulated, they can be limited. You can't go buy bazookas or cannons and stuff like that, but the court have to rule on some of these things as to what's constitutional and what's not constitutional, but they have ruled that people can own guns. John?
I'm going to give John 3 minutes because you had 3 minutes, Jimmy.
I found it. The Bill of Rights includes 2 amendments other than the second to use the phrase right of the people. Now, the phrase right of the people is really the central phrase in the Second Amendment. The militia part is considered to be explanatory. That is why they're doing it. But the right of the people is considered to be the action part. Okay, Amendment number 1. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And that's an individual right, the right of the people. That phrase gives the people the right. Okay, Amendment number 4. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now, this one has gotten a lot of attention recently, and this is the Fourth Amendment has never had any court cases that involved in its incorporation. But with drones and things like that going on, you can pretty well predict that we're going to end up incorporating that one too.
Thank you, John.
Another question back here?
Now, Jimmy, do you want to respond to that, or you want to
No.
take another question?
Another question?
I would like to make a statement and ask a question. All right, the rights of the people. That doesn't mean the people have the right to do anything that they want to do, have as many guns. Then if you want people to have any type of weapons, assault weapons, anytime they want, over the internet, because this is a new age. When the Constitution was written, it was written years and years ago. For that time, then we had to have amendments come in as we advance. I cannot understand why you do not believe that people should be limited on how they obtain a weapon. Assault weapons do not shoot 1 time, 2 times. And then when you say when invading of a person's home, that if you shoot an assault weapon in your house, it's going to shoot up a whole lot more because it has been proven. It does not go straight. My husband was in the military, 22 and a half years. We had weapons. But my husband had a big lock thing. I was uncomfortable because my kids knew how to get in. You cannot have no weapons. He had locks on them. He showed them how to clean them and everything. But that didn't stop. And still my grandchildren have friends that parents have weapons, and I cannot understand why they should not have the same regulation as a driver's license, because if you drive on a car on the street, you are endangering somebody else. And you should have the same type of regulation as an automobile, a person having an automobile in order to obtain a weapon, which is, a weapon is something to kill, nothing else.
All right, Jimmy,
It kills.
Jimmy, I'm going to give you 3 minutes here to answer, and then I'll give John 3 minutes.
Well, that's right. These military-style assault weapons, they're very dangerous, they're very scary, but they actually do just have the same shooting capacity as a deer rifle. It's one pull per bullet.
They do.
It depends on how big of a clip they have in there as to how many times they can fire it. And sometimes, of course, they can change those clips pretty fast. And the NRA and the gun people like to say that they're just scary-looking rifles, and they are, but they do, like I say, they look like a military assault weapon, and they've been used in a lot of these killings at schools and so forth. I believe they're called the AR-15, and a lot of people seem to want to have those, and they collect them and so forth. But like I say, we have these mass killings in schools and so forth, but we actually have more people than that killed every day, more than 30 people killed every day, murdered every day with guns. And 1 million Americans have been murdered by guns since Dr. Martin Luther King's death in 1968. 1 million Americans have been murdered by guns. So it's a serious problem in our country. I don't think any other country comes close to having as many guns in their homes as we do. And we're paying for it. I'd like to warn all women that if you live in a house with a man who has a gun, you're putting your life in danger. These husbands, we often read in the newspaper that some man his wife wants to leave him, gets upset with him.
Wait a minute.
And the man gets the gun out and kills his wife. Sometimes he kills his children. Sometimes he kills himself. But there's a lot of these killings of women by men that they're living with who have guns in the home. So I think I would like to advise all women to tell their husband or their boyfriend they're not going to live there as long as they have a gun in the home. You'll be much safer without that gun in your home. Okay, John.
Would you like to respond to that, Tom?
Sure. Well,
I'll give you 3 minutes.
I just want to respond to the statement that this lady back here said, and that is, in the state of Nebraska, if you want to buy a handgun, you have to be, number one, a resident of the state, and number two, you have to have a card from the state of Nebraska that looks kind of like a driver's license with your picture on it. And anybody from out of state can't buy a handgun. Of course, I've got a farm up there, so whenever I spend my time up there, I'm out of state. It's okay, I don't need any more handguns anyhow. But I thought it was kind of interesting. Individual states have the right to pass their own laws as long as they don't interfere with federal laws. And many states do have very specific laws which are more limiting than federal laws. I think California does. You're talking about an assault weapons ban, which really you can call a modern sporting rifle is now the correct name for an assault rifle. When assault rifles first came out, I was not hugely interested in them. I don't have one. I never fired one. But I followed it with great interest. And over the years, I have concluded that assault weapons are neat. They are an advance in the state of the art, any way you measure it, in terms of performance of weapons. That is, if you got a car, you can measure the performance of a car. If you've got anything, you can measure its performance based on how well it does what it's supposed to do. And our so-called modern sporting rifles represent a true advance in the state of the art for any purpose. They really work fine. They're accurate, they're reliable. They're not affected by relative humidity like wooden stocks are. The zero doesn't change when the humidity changes. And it's amazing how accurate they are with everybody always said, oh, you had to have a bolt action for good accuracy. You could never get good accuracy from a semi-auto action. But these semi-auto actions will shoot 1-inch groups at 100 yards all day. They're less affected by heat. When barrels get hot in standard rifles, the groups get bigger. With a well-designed assault rifle, those barrels can get so hot you can't touch them, and they still group well. So, from a practical point of view, if you believe in the basic concept of improvement of the state of the art, it turns out that the assault rifles are a lot better than anything I got. But that's okay, because what I've got's good enough.
Thank you, John. Jimmy, do you want to take another question, or do you want to respond to what?
Let's go to another question, yeah, Laura.
I think we have to refocus every now and then on why. And I think that you can't really have a decent conversation with somebody without asking why. So here's the why. what is the purpose of guns? Why do we want guns? Why does anyone want guns? And obviously, the thing that pops into mind is self-defense, kill people that I don't want near me. The problem is that a lot of people use guns when something else would work better. You know, sometimes you just need to move out, not kill your spouse. And I think it's the wrong solution. It's a solution that doesn't have a problem, in my personal opinion. The problem is the people who are very passionate about defending them will have reasons of their own, right? And they have a belief that this gun is somehow keeping them safe from something. And I think you need to recognize that people are afraid of different things. There's people who are afraid of the black teenagers who hang out in the intersection near their house. There's people who are afraid of the government, despite the fact that we elect those people and we can throw them out with a vote. So, you know, my response to I don't like the people in power is to become a precinct chair and make people go vote. Other people's response is to go shoot Gabby Giffords. So I think if you look at what are all the reasons somebody wants a gun, I think you can find that there is a gun that matches that, and you take the ones that are insane and get rid of those guns, because that's not a good reason.
Do you want to ask him the question?
The question is, what guns are okay and what guns are not okay?
How much time are you going to need for that, Jimmy? About an hour?
I want a short list, 5 minutes.
So you want 2 minutes, Jimmy?
That's all we get to answer questions
Well, I've been
anyway.
giving y'all 3 minutes because sometimes it's...
Okay, well, to me, all guns are dangerous. I think it's dangerous to have a gun in your home. I think guns should only be used by the police and by the military. And they should not be in any home, actually. I think we'd all be much safer. In fact, the statistics show that a woman who lives in a home with a gun is 2.7% more times more likely to be murdered than a woman who does not have a gun in the home. So women are all much safer in homes without guns, and so are children. If you have many of your people are really shocked when their child commits suicide with their gun. But some of these, one boy was written up, he was about to get married and everything, and he ended up killing himself with a gun. They had no idea what happened, but he obviously got distressed, upset, whatever. A handy gun there available to pull up and use makes it easy for him to kill himself and sometimes to kill other people. So I'm arguing to keep guns out of the homes, and we ought to have, I think, more gun buybacks. We ought to have trigger locks on all the guns. We ought to have more gun safety courses. And the NRA ought to stop lying to us about how it's always the criminal versus us, when most of these killings are done by people who had no criminal record. And the police need to be out there in areas that have high crime rates, high murder rates. That'll help keep down crime and make us all safer. We all need to know who to phone, you know, if you have somebody lurking around your house that may have a gun, and call your local constable or your local policeman and have them protect you instead of trying to go out there with a gun that you may not be able to handle. There's a lot of accidental shootings also with kids who pick up guns, and 5-year-old kids pick up guns and ends up shooting a friend or themselves. So it's good for parents to not have guns in the house if you have children there. And I definitely don't think teachers should have guns in the classroom. Students can find those guns. Students can find those guns and steal them from you and whatever. So let's keep guns out of the schools, but let's have guards there to possibly protect children.
John, you have a response to that or a continuation of your...
Well, to the basic question the Laura brought up, yeah. Laura asked the basic question, and when I thought of it before I came over here, I kind of anticipated it. The question I had was, why have guns? Why do people have guns? What do you need them for? And in my case, I like them. That's why I got them. If I didn't like them, I wouldn't have them. As far as the purpose is concerned, I really enjoy going out to the shooting range and shooting. I find that if you shoot a gun, you have to do two things. At the same time, you have to relax and you have to focus. And when you stop and think about it, the act of relaxing and focusing at the same time is kind of strange. It's sort of inconsistent. But yet, you got to do it. And if you do it, the better you do it, the tighter your groups are going to get. And so you get a direct measure about how good you're doing at relieving stress. So if you had a stressed out day at the work and want to relieve stress, it's the best stress reliever there is. Second thing has to do with the way in which my own family background. My grandfather was Russian German. He taught marksman to the Russian army people in Russia. And then they came over to this country. When my dad was a little kid, they lived in Friend, Nebraska, and they lived in a dirt-floored house that Granddad built, and they ate very organically, including a lot of game. They went out and they got game animals by hunting and trapping and fishing and that sort of thing. And so all the kids grew up and they went to college and went on and did well, but they all liked to hunt and fish, and so that's just part of the family. So for me to learn how to do that was natural. In our part of the world in southeast Nebraska, that's what everybody does. And so you get into these rural areas and it's just part of rural life.
Thank you. Jimmy, you want to answer that, or you want to take another question?
I just want to tell two incidents about friends that I've had. One of them was killed himself with a gun, committed suicide with a gun. I'd known him for a long time at going to another Memorial Drive Presbyterian church. And then another man that came to some programs at St. John Vianney. We sat at the same table with him, and he went home that day, killed his wife with his gun, and killed himself. And those things happen when you have guns in the home and a guy gets depressed. So it's very dangerous for you to have a gun in your home, and I hope you will get rid of your guns. Okay, another question. Lewis.
Addressed to John, a couple of observations, and ask if you agree with them too. But in response to Jimmy, you know, you don't need a gun to kill somebody in your home. You can kill with an axe, you can kill with a knife, all other things. Last John, don't you believe that assault weapons, if you reduce assault weapons, you'd have less chance of these terrible mass killings that seem to happen regularly every few years? Well, I'll have some other questions for John. You know, do you believe that there should be, at gun shows, proper investigation of the buyer before you trade a gun? Wait, I've got another question.
I think I was going to say
do you agree that that repealing our drug laws would reduce a lot of killings, because most of these violent crimes on the streets seem to be drug related? And I want to observe that you know, the greatest threat to our democracy is a large standing army. The British for years have had that fear and seen to it they did not have large standing armies, and because some insane general could decide that our country, you know, was being was going to hell if he didn't save the country and have a coup. And of course,
I think that's about all he can answer.
Yeah, Lewis, that's enough for one right now.
I can remember. I've even forgotten the first.
I'm taking notes.
I know you agree that you know, you feel that gun laws don't keep criminals from getting weapons. They just disarm the public. That's your view, I'm sure.
Well,
John, yeah, come up here, John.
Jimmy, can you come here a minute?
with regard to gun laws, the basic problem we've got is there are so many of them. They're so inconsistent, and they're so unevenly enforced. One of the interesting gun laws that's come up is that on background checks, it's a felony for a felon to go try to buy a gun and have a background check indicate that he's a felon, because felons aren't supposed to buy guns, and so that makes it a federal felony. I don't think any, and I don't think that this is ever, I think maybe a few cases have actually been prosecuted. And that's just because they wanted to prosecute these guys on something that was the only thing they could get them on. But out of the millions and millions of background checks, I think about thousands of them are actually done by people who can't pass the background check. And that is a felony, and it is not enforced. But the federal government should be enforcing it.
My question was gun shows.
With regard to gun shows, frankly, I don't know. I think that it depends on what you think about being practical about things. I think most laws indicate that, or most studies indicate that with regard to gun shows, 2 or 3% of guns that end up in the illegal market come from gun shows. The rest of them come from other sources. So the percentage is very low. Assault weapons are the same. 1 or 2% of assault weapons have been used in homicide, just a few percent. So the question is, how much trouble do you want to go to pick up a couple percent? And many of these laws are like that. The most hot button items that people get the most excited about are, from a statistical point of view, not very important. Another very good example of that is mass shootings. In the United States, on the average, over about the last 20 years, about 35 people are killed each year in mass shootings. Some years much higher and some less. Now, a few years ago, I tell you, Postal Department employees probably felt they ought to be wearing bulletproof vests because they had people going into the post office department for some reason and shooting up everybody and then shooting themselves. That is a mass killing. Usually they involve 3 or 4 people, but they add up. So if you add them all up, they add up. But still, it is such a small percentage of the totals, 35 people out of 10,000. The basic question is, how much trouble you're going to go to try and get the 35 out of 10,000. Now, if you look at the 10,000, where do most of them come from? They come from the black community, with apologies to ladies in the back. So the question becomes, why is that? What do we need to know about that?
Isn't it actually correlated to poverty, not race?
Yeah, thank you, John. To get back to part of Lewis's question.
I got a publication.
He talked about how you can kill somebody in your home without a gun, with some other weapon, but that's much more difficult to kill somebody with other items, and it's also much more difficult to kill yourself without a gun. Suicides by gun are 85% effective, means you die, and the other 15% live with the wound, whereas people who try to commit suicide with pills, they're only about 5% effective, and they live for another day. So guns are much more dangerous than any other method of trying to kill somebody. Okay, let's take another question. Okay,
I have a comment more than a question. I think the real problem is mental health.
Yeah, there you go.
It is the shooter who killed all those children in New England. The weapons that he used were legal. They belonged to his mother. He took his mother's guns. She had bought them legally, and he took them and shot all those children. So, and right now, in our legislature, Senator Hoffman has introduced a bill to do something about the mental health of people. That's the real problem. There's a lot of perfectly sane people who are gun owners, who are careful and they don't go out and shoot people. But it's the crazies. We've got to do something about the crazies. And it doesn't matter what color they are or anything else.
Ellen, that's a good comment. We do need more mental health facilities. We need to be able to treat people that are having mental health difficulties.
Obamacare.
We need to have all those things available for people that are under stress that other people can refer them to. I want taking questions from people who haven't asked one yet. Buzz. And Ellen, thank you for your question.
The gun thing is being approached all wrong. I personally have a gun. I haven't shot it. I won it in a poker game about 40 years ago. 3 sevens would beat 2 pair every time. The gun is something that we're debating wrong. The Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, has said you can own a gun. Okay, that's a dead issue. We all get to have guns. Now, the Supreme Court hasn't said this, but it's a given. We can own a car. We can own any number of things we want to that can wind up in a disaster. We can generate a disaster with it. So what do? We regulate it. What do you have to do before you can regulate? You have to establish responsibility. Now, I say that if you want a gun for protection, varmint shooting, whatever you float your boat, you go get your gun, you put a thumbprint or an eye print, you put your picture on your little card and you carry it around. Now, they also keep a bullet in your gun. If somebody gets killed and that matches your gun, now guess who's responsible? Responsibility, like everything else. If somebody steals your car, who goes to jail? Who's arrested? You are. Then it's up to you to prove they stole your car. Why can't we parallel this to all of this? This is a big distraction. The NRA is a money factory. And they get all the little varmint eaters to back them up on their stand. And these people are the soldiers of stupidity for the most part.
Well, Jimmy, do you have an answer to that?
Let me say one more thing. Until you are responsible, until a law comes out that says you are responsible, then you don't have a handle on the problem. It's not a gun problem. It's what you do with the gun. It's like everything else we have in society. Thank you.
Maybe we should let John answer that.
Thank you, Buzz.
Jimmy, let's let John
Yeah,
answer.
John, come up and answer that question.
Let me give you 3 minutes, John.
Well, I don't know exactly what the question was, but I guess I'm not opposed to it. People have brought up the idea of requiring liability insurance. I have liability insurance for, I've got some rental property, and so you really need to have it anyway. I also have a concealed handgun license, and this is what it looks like. It's got my picture on it. The FBI has my fingerprints on record at the FBI. Every few years I got to go through and take a refresher course on it. I hardly ever carry a pistol. Things are really uncomfortable to carry around, but they're kind of fun, and I really think it's neat just to be able to, honest to God, carry a pistol around. I think when you stop and think about it, it is a remarkable and huge responsibility. It really is. And so anybody who considers anything like this has to accept it as such and to realize that it's a huge responsibility. But that said, number one, they're kind of uncomfortable. Number two, you tend to forget you got it. And so it's just like carrying anything else that you have. And I do carry it occasionally if I think that I probably ought to, but not very often. But I still think that it provides a tremendous psychological advantage for the general public. And the reason is that criminals who like to have guns because psychologically it gives them a tremendous feeling of power. And when they know that the general public can carry guns legally, and they probably got a better gun than the criminal does, and they get to go out and practice a lot at the range, and they get to be pretty good shots. And after what's happened now is that every once in a while some criminal gets shot. And if he survives, he ends up in prison. And his prison mates probably say, what are you in for? And word gets out that he's got in because he tried to hold somebody up and got shot by the victim, which might be an old guy like me. And I think that among his prison mates, that's probably about as bad as it can get. He probably wished he'd gotten killed. So I think from a practical point of view, concealed carry has value as a psychological deterrent to criminals, much more than a physical one. But statistics actually show it's a physical one too, because the number who get shot is pretty high.
John, I want to ask you a question. If you were in a jewelry store and you were coming through the door and you saw somebody with a gun on the jeweler, or you were walking down the street and you saw a little old lady being robbed by somebody with a gun, would you challenge them with your gun if you had it with you? And would you legally be able to do that?
Basically, no, I would not. The reason is,
John, stand up.
when you carry a gun for self-defense, there are two words here. The first word is self, the second word is defense. And so if you run into situations where it looks like you ought to come to somebody else's aid, it's very complex because you don't know what's going on, number one. Number two, you have tremendous problems, tremendous potential to get into trouble. And so I suppose that under some circumstances you could do it. There are, and people do it, and they become heroes. Other people do it and they don't become heroes. And so it's just very, it's difficult. But I remember a quote by a sheriff or a policeman from a police department who predicted that once concealed carry permits were made available, everybody's going to be shooting at each other in the streets. He said, not only have people not been doing that, but he said, I tell you, I'd rather have somebody with their own gun providing self-defense than one of my patrolmen. The reason being, if you get a patrolman involved, he's going to shoot the guy. If you've got a person involved, they don't. The reason is the person looks down his gun barrel at the criminal, and the criminal looks at the person down his gun barrel, and they say, well, you know, I don't want to get shot. Do you want to get shot? The other guy said, no, I don't want to get shot. Do you? Said, no. Said, okay, well, I got a pretty good idea. Let's just part company. And that's the way it happens. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of times per year, confrontations like that occur where nobody gets shot. But I tell you, the police get involved in it, somebody's going to get shot, even in many circumstances where they should not be.
Thank you, John. Jimmy, do you have a response to that?
I just want to say that the National Rifle Association has a lot of political power. They have a lot of strong supporters, and they do have a lot of influence on our legislatures and on our Congress. But we can overcome their influence by voting and letting your legislator know that you would like universal background checks for all gun sales, that you would like to have the size of clips or magazines limited to 10 rounds, and that these military-style assault weapons should not be sold or owned by people. So we do have the people power to overcome the influence of the NRA, and it takes some good, courageous members of the legislature and Congress to stand with us. We can take one more question. Okay, Sid.
I'd like to respond to her question earlier about purpose of firearms, etc., and one type of firearm in particular, pistol. Historically, from the time of the invention of the pistol around the 1600s, pistols were manufactured primarily to shoot humans. They weren't designed for hunting. They weren't designed to shoot deer. They weren't designed to shoot birds. They were designed to shoot people. And this has been true for the last 400 years. And these assault weapons that people make all the press, they only account for a minuscule amount of murders. Minuscule. 90% of your murders by firearms are committed by pistols. People owning pistols. Okay? And until this country gets to the point, like England has, to outlaw or extreme tax on pistols, I mean, all this other stuff is a waste of time, in my opinion, because pistols are the primary problem. And the most effective firearm control has been in New York State and New York City, where the price of a firearm or a pistol, the price of a pistol has gone up like $500 or $1,000 because of restrictions. It doesn't pay the criminal to get hold, spend $500 or $1,000 to get a pistol, to rob some store for $100. It doesn't make economic sense. And New York State hadn't banned the outlaw of pistols, hadn't banned the ownership of pistols, but they've caused the price of pistols to escalate to a high cost that criminals can't economically afford to buy a pistol.
Sid, that's not correct. Stop and frisk in New York City is what caused them to quit carrying pistols. They have a law there in New York City, the police, for any purpose they have, if they suspect somebody might possibly be carrying a pistol, even though they have no evidence, whatever, they can stop and frisk them. And they do that without a warrant or anything like that. And this, of course, is considered to be unconstitutional, and they're getting upset about it now and saying, look, you guys can't continue to do that. But one thing that it has done is it has really gotten all the handguns off the streets. Because they're doing two things. They're doing stop and frisk, and if you're carrying a gun, they have mandatory felony, and they have been prosecuted. And so that's what's done it. It's not the cost of the guns, those guys.
So there's a
Okay,
law.
thank you, Sid. We're going to have to close it down pretty quick here, but I wanted to say one last thing. I think we can also reduce gun deaths through education. Send out the word that a gun in the home is 22 times more likely to shoot a family member or friend than an intruder. That includes suicides, accidental shootings, and murders. A gun in the home is 22 times more likely to shoot a family member or friend than an intruder. If everybody knows that, I think they'll get rid of the guns out of the homes. We'll have far fewer murders, far fewer suicides, far fewer accidental deaths. Thank you for coming.
Jimmy, I take that to be your concluding remark. Do you have a concluding remark?
Yeah, I do.
Well, please give it to us, and then we'll wind it up.
Okay, one problem we have is just that the debates, these debates are not very productive. What we have to do is start making them more productive. But from a practical point of view, one fellow pointed out a while ago, he asked the question, if you have a child and this child can go and play with a friend, one friend whom they know has guns in the house, and the other friend who has a swimming pool. The question is, which friend would be the safest to play with based on statistics? And it turns out that the child is much more likely to drown in the swimming pool than they are to be killed from accidental shooting with a gun. And so our perceptions on a lot of these things are not very accurate. The statistics that people tend to get upset about can help to at least lay some groundwork which will help to put things into perspective and help us to figure out the best way to proceed. I myself don't know the best way to proceed in this area. I am, again, myself extremely curious about this issue about blacks. The Congo and the Uganda have by far the highest murder rates. They run around 30 to 40 per 100,000.
Is that a year?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. The great gun debate is over. Look forward on public access. And have a great day and be safe.